I grew up in the small molecule world, yeah, and I have some drugs which went into development. One is on the market, so I've seen how it moves on. And when you deliver the development candidate into the clinical development unit, they always tell you, don't care about the synthesis, how you do it. We will do it differently anyhow. So that's at the stage when you like do the transition into the preclinical clinical development. For gene editing, gene therapy, it's completely different. You have to go so much earlier, as you mentioned. So already like 1-2 years prior to what you would consider a development candidate, you have to think about how to manufacture for the clinic, for the phase 1, and so on. And that also comes with an investment, isn't it? So you have to reserve slots potentially with CMOs and so on. So you make a much higher risk investment, which is difficult for small companies. Yeah? There's plenty of small companies, but suddenly you're talking millions of investment just to secure something which is maybe beyond your space of workability, because you think you might out-license this after phase 1 or so, isn't it? But you have to go very early and make this investment. That's a challenge to us and others. Yeah.
Maybe to add one example from Kite, which is notable to me always, is that Kite started building their commercial manufacturing facility before we had treated a single patient. So you can imagine what the discussion is with the board at that moment, where you have not even started up a clinical trial and you're talking about building a commercial facility. But that happened to be the key of success, because building that manufacturing, doing all the dry runs, making sure that your all QA, QC compliance is in place, was actually the key for us to launch at the moment we got approval in the US. We could never have done that if we started building our commercial facility later. And that's, I think, also one of the tricky parts, at least for cell therapy. We had 27 months between filing, getting the IND and getting market approval. So it can go pretty fast, and if you're not ready to trigger that part, then well, you cannot deliver your therapy when you actually the company would get approval. So that's things that you have to take into consideration, I think. The story is very important. I think if you get the story out to patients, the whole discussion about the impact of gene therapy or cell therapy, they basically don't care, right? I mean, if you have no choice anymore, there's no fear of cell therapy or gene therapy and gene modification. I think for a patient, that's okay. What we have seen is that we have continuously educated the whole society basically on what it is, what it means. And what was striking was that the most of education is actually required to the physicians, the potentially treating physicians. They are inherently, I wouldn't say ignorant, but not aware of what it means and what it can bring. And there's always like a small population of the physicians that read their New England Journal of Medicine papers and things like that. Those are usually always also the ones that are in the more academic centra that we target for this highly specialized therapy. So those are okay, but what we've seen is that most referral from periphery is coming from educated patients that tell their physician, is this not something that would apply to me in this situation? So, and then we need to have a physician actually transferring that patient out of their personal clinic into a center where the treatment is given. That's challenging. So I think physicians need to be very well trained, and patient, we align with many patient organizations, lymphoma societies, things like that. That's crucial, because patients, if they know the way, and more patients know the way, but they're still also referring to their advocacy groups, it's very important to make them aware about the success, and well, with the drug or the treatment coming to market. I think there's more and more awareness, but I think that's really crucial that we had to We did large research among clinicians, and that's really challenging to get them online and on board with this new therapy, especially if they cannot deliver it themselves. So if they have to refer to colleagues, that's a real barrier.
What are some of the considerations regarding market access and price? I think they're somewhat distinct, but I'll roll them together for now. How are you thinking about pricing market access? How should other companies be thinking about pricing market access for cell and gene therapies?
Yeah, so I think in principle the warranty model is a good one, yeah, like we've seen now for several things and might see in the future. So you only pay as long as you have positive action, yeah? And this is easy in some indications where you have a clear biomarker that you can measure. So in hemophilia A, you could consider the factor VIII expression in the body. You can measure that easily. So you would see if somebody is beyond a special threshold. Now you would have to discuss what is the threshold. So because let's say if it's 5% factor VIII versus normal, doesn't mean that you don't have any bleeds, isn't it? So there could still be microbleeds and so on. So that's not a cure potentially. If you have a car accident, suddenly you have a real hemorrhage, even 20% might not be enough. So you're different than the normal healthy volunteer. So that's, but at least much easier if you can measure that. How do we do that in diseases where we cannot measure this easily? And then specifically looking into the future, gene editing could be used for risk reduction. Think about cardiology. I mean, there's genes involved which you can change, maybe knock out and so on, and you would have a reduced risk in an infarct. How do you pay for that? I mean, maybe the patient has a car accident next day and dies. Then, I mean, would you pay back because the patient is not there anymore? Or I mean, that's very difficult. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, and then like Novartis is doing, like you don't have to pay anything if it's failing. I mean, there's still some investment, isn't it? So we have to consider that as well. Novartis can do it. Maybe they just say, these few patients we don't care too much about financially. Yeah? But in the end, for a smaller company, that's a huge investment. As we just discussed, all the manufacturing, everything, you have done that. So should there be a base price that you have to pay and then add on, it's based on duration. That's also difficult to manage as a company because how do you plan on that, your future, isn't it? How long will you have income? Now we have licenses behind this. So do we pay continuously the license? Is that the first payment or is that also going to this annuity model as long as there's treatment? It's all difficult, yeah. So a lot of aspects behind that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it is a difficult subject for treatment. What we should realize, I think, in these kind of therapies, and I talk for CAR-T, just the cost of goods are significant. Right now, for the patients that we treat in Europe, we have to fly their samples over to LA, basically to get modified and back and released and things like that. So if you just think about all the work that is included, that's going to be a base cost that will apply to basically every patient. And then on top of that, of course, there's the capacity of earning back that you have, and then there is something that is a profit margin that you need to invest into new developments. Those are, I think, the cost of goods are what we're trying is to bring them back, right, continuously to make sure that you look where can we cut down on prices, can we close the systems more, take out people from the equation. Don't forget about gowning, for example, in clean rooms. Gowning, I think initially it was like millions of dollars, depending if you use disposable gowning, just to start dry runs. So it is a difficult discussion. I think internally there's pretty good understanding. Even among physicians, we can explain a lot. But it's also societal decision on what you want to spend on healthcare in general and an individual patient. And if you talk about the family of the patient, it's a different discussion. But on the other hand, we're all taxpayers. So it is a difficult discussion. Also, I think it's good to realize that these are inherently expensive because of the cost of goods. And the rest, I think, we will negotiate with with the authorities and the payers, but it is also it remains a difficult discussion and a very individual discussion that will be a continuous progress on where you want to cut, where you can cut, what kinds of systems will work. And I think that's going to be there, because there's going to be a global change. And in Europe, I think it's a little bit stronger than in the US right now. But we will have to face it. And I think the only way to do is to make sure that there will be at least a general understanding of what things are susceptible to reduction. Like, I mean, if we start buying as a European Union, that will change. I mean, because you increase the market for your drug, and increasing the market will have an effect on the price. So it's all, I think it's all that interplay about pharma needs to change their vision, but also society has to make certain choices on what they want for in their healthcare system.
So in that respect, one of the things that strikes me when we go into all these issue of pricing of gene and cell therapy products is that the debate tends to center about this one product and what price should it get, and this 1 million price tag. And I'm no expert in oncology, but I can tell you the story about the cardiovascular project that we run. And one thing that we learned is that as we were developing, mesenchymal stem cell therapy for AMI, for example, things were moving around us. So one of the things that we realized is that the way in which patients were being treated, the fast access to PCI was improving, medical treatment of people after having an infarct was also improving, so that the bar that we had to meet was rising as we were progressing with these trials, and these were coming at a lower cost. So basically, even if all these cardiovascular developments have been as successful as we would have liked, they would have probably been priced out of the market, and it wouldn't have been a decision of the payers not wanting to pay for these things, but the payers having other options that are as good and cheaper and provide the same level of survival over the years than what this fantastic cell therapy could have been. So one of the things that I don't know whether in oncology it's the same thing, but you have all the checkpoint inhibitors and all that. CAR-T will be one option in a portfolio of, and therefore there is a price that is not only what you can solve today, but how you will be able to compete.
Well, I think it's very much dependent also on the positioning. If you think about our product, right, you come in as a third-line therapy, that's where you can test. But if you think about that you could maybe put CAR-T in a second line, preventing stem cell transplantation in certain indications, I mean, then you're talking totally different value that you deliver. So you prevent a stem cell transplantation of 500K and you have put in a T-cell therapy for 300K. I mean, then the value discussion is totally different. So it's very much dependent on what indication, where you can treat, what patient population, how many patients. Like EMA gives approval, and before you're on the market in Europe, you're at least 6 months, but in some countries 2-3 years later. If you open the entire European market after EMA approval, and we all agree that that's possible, then you bring back, you increase your earning back time, right? I mean, every day later on the market for a blockbuster is 2.5 million. So if you can earn that back over a longer period, that should have an effect. And I think also pharma should be open to discuss that. But I think it's a two-way street, and sometimes I have the feeling, at least sometimes the discussions that we have in the Netherlands, that's a one-time street. Like pharma needs to be more transparent on what they do, and then the government will judge on what they do with that. And I think it needs to become a two-way street, and I would be an advocate to actually say that pharma should take the first step.